All right, guys, we are back with another office hour discussion. And today's topic actually got brought up in the Discord. So I'll let people vote on the topic that they wanted to bring up. And Ian said maybe something on the non technical skills that data scientist needs would be a good third topic, storytelling, stakeholder engagement, etc. How have you developed these skills, or did they come naturally? And a few other people agreed on that, messaged us on it. So we don't have any videos, I don't believe, really on non-technical skills. We've alluded to some in our discussions, but I do think that is a good point because half of the battle at times, right? You could have perfect code, you could understand stuff, but if you can't parlay that into like a presentation or demonstrate how important something is that you discover, no one's going to take action on it. So we'll go along on that side of things. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, no, like usual, this is a blind discussion or interview style. So I don't know what, I didn't prep for this question or things like that. So I'll be firing off the top of my head on what I think that looks like, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, and the same here. I just saw the question and I figured let's just both go blindly into this one. And I think it'd be kind of fun. So
Yeah.
for storytelling and stuff like that, obviously you have an agency. Have you really focused studying any storytelling concepts? Have you read any books, read any theories, papers on that side of things? Or did you develop this over time, like initially at your first jobs and then kind of parlaying that into how you work with customers today?
Yeah, I mean, my role now with with agency and sales and things like that is a lot of the storytelling. When I was an engineer, it wasn't as much, but you do a decent amount of that, especially if you're presenting work or you're trying to get like internal customers, or you're just trying to get better at how you talk about what you do, which of course leads to promotions and things like that. It wasn't something that I studied or really did a lot of work on. I've always been like pretty good at it. I mean, especially like if you're in school doing this stuff, like you get pretty used to that as well, where
Yeah, I will
if you
say
do
that
like a senior
not
thesis.
not to interrupt, but I will say it's funny because like going to school in high school, middle school, and even college, you get so nervous for presentations. You're like, oh man, you get the jitters, you get the butterflies.
Yeah.
Now in the real world, it's like this is so easy. Like it does not matter. Like you mess up in a presentation, you just say, man, I messed up. And go back from where it is. In middle school, high school, you may think one mistake is going to kill you, and it's funny how that perspective changes as you get a bit older.
Yeah, I mean, especially if the stakeholders are internal, you do get nervous for external stuff if you think it's really important or it is really important or whatever. But if it's internal, you're doing something, it's not as I would say like scary or whatever words you want to use, because you honestly, like, you have the job, you're already working, like there's not as much on the line normally if you're working with internal stakeholders versus you're selling to somebody, or you're working with external customers. Like that's where it gets a little different. But when you're an engineer, like I said, especially if you were if you were in college, you usually had to do some of this. It does feel a little bit more like that when it's internal than it does when you're selling something externally, or dealing with outside partners or something like that.
What I will say, and this could be a possible change that we jump through, is explaining technical terms to non-technical people, because I do see that asked on interviews as well, and people bring that up all the time, whether it's on like a forum like a Reddit or another Discord groups I've been in. People are like, how do I explain this to someone if they don't understand statistics or don't understand machine learning? And I think that is kind of one tangent we should probably bring up.
Yeah.
I think other people do have that idea, like, man, what is going on? So, for example, I do a lot of proof of concepts, POCs at work, where I have to tell specifically, is the software good or not? And being that I'm in risk, we deal with a lot of fraud. So I have to work with fraud vendors and things like that. So we send them data and we expect to have information brought back to us. Typically it's binary, right? We think it's fraud or non-fraud in essence. So I have to present that story to my internal stakeholders on that side of things. And we're talking about different levels, right? The managers typically know a good amount about statistics. Obviously, they're not going to be fully studying statistics in school, but they have the basic understanding. But then people underneath them, right, like your analysts or underwriters, I don't expect them to have a full breadth of statistical work or statistical knowledge. So I really try to break it down as easy as possible. One of the ways I've done that before is kind of demonstrating, what are some of the different probabilities of flipping a coin, right? Whether it's going to be heads or tails, showing them a normally distributed curve and essentially like how the software ended up being within this normally distributed curve, and showing people like, even if they get like, let's say you have a sample size of 500, they get 270 predictions correct. And we're not even talking about, jumping into a confusion matrix, just basic, right? Predicted correctly or not. That's still part of the normally distributed curve. You should expect flipping coins. It's perfectly possible someone gets 280 coins or 280 heads if you flip 500 coins in general, and it's not necessarily the software was good.
Yeah, I mean, I would say a lot of our sort of, presentation work, and this is just a good concept in general, is usually very result focused. Even if you have a room, full of non-technical people, if you can display and really focus on the results that came out of it, whether that's findings, whether that's accuracy scores that are easy to understand, try to focus on that. Now, we always have the technical info prepped just in case maybe there is somebody on the call who's technical that wants to go in a little bit further, or maybe they do actually want to talk about stuff. We always have it prepped, but our initial walkthrough with the customer or external stakeholder is more high level, and it's always results focused. Nobody in that room that's non-technical is really that interested in anything outside of the results, especially if they're paying you money to do this. So that's generally what we focus on. And then we always have the technical info locked and loaded just in case, because you will get on calls and maybe somebody in the room is technical and they want to chat about it. But I always think it's just a really good idea to just make sure that you have the results stuff ready. The results are clear and easy to understand. There's some info about, what you did to get to those results. Try to have as much of the use case available, but be able to shrink it down to as few sort of numbers to talk about as possible.
Yeah, and also knowing your audience is key. Like, some people in your audience really want to see the data or the statistics behind it. Some people literally just care about the results and expect you to do everything correctly. And I think that is something that you pick up pretty quickly when you work with someone either on like a daily or a monthly basis. So really pay attention on that side of things and tailor your presentations towards that. Especially at my first company that I worked at with the tax software, there were some stakeholders that did not care about anything. They just wanted to see the numbers. They didn't care how you got the numbers. What are the numbers? That is the only thing I care about on this slide. And that's where you're mentioning, right? If you want to have that data, put that in an appendix at the very end. Maybe there's someone that asks about it and just go over there. But for certain stakeholders, this is a number, that is it. Other stakeholders want to see the whole process, starting from the beginning, how you source the data, walking through, cleaning up data, and then what your results here are at the end.
Yeah, and from the side of how do you prep for that sort of swing in conversation, when we give these presentations, I am acting as the stakeholder from our side. And I can talk about the technical stuff if we really want, but if I wasn't as involved, we always bring an engineer as well, who just sort of waits to see if the conversation goes that route. But it really depends on I just think it's a big preparation exercise where did you prep everything that you have to talk at the high level, but did you also prep the stuff in case they have technical questions? Because what you don't really want to do is say, oh, I don't know, we'll get back to you. It's just,
it's bad.
It's not great. It's not my fit. If you can avoid that, you want to avoid it. There's stuff that's going to come up that, maybe you didn't prep or whatever, but you try to avoid as much of that as possible to make sure that your results are as clear as possible, and that the people are ready to talk about what they need to talk about if it goes more technical.
The other thing I see brought up quite a bit, people mention, oh, is there better alternatives than PowerPoint? Personally, I just use PowerPoint for usability. And on top of it, like at least in the corporate world, so many people are just so used to PowerPoint. You send them something else, they're like, what is this? If you send them a PowerPoint, someone knows exactly what they're getting into on that side of things, especially if you present it. And look, I'm not trying to diss all these software out there. Things that you can jump like bubble to bubble. I can't remember what software that is for presenting. Maybe if you remember or not. Like I think they have their use cases, but in general, especially as you get like an older clientele or older stakeholders, they just expect a PowerPoint. Don't go super fancy with it. Put your specific bullet points on there. No one wants to read paragraphs on there. In fact, no one will read a paragraph. As one thing I do remember from college is one of our classes on presenting mentioned like each slide should have as limited text as possible because you really are going to bore someone during a meeting, especially if you just have paragraph after paragraph. Like if you're in the meeting, are you going to read 5 sentences on every slide, especially if it becomes 50 to 100 slides? You're not going to do that.
Yeah, we'll use PowerPoint for when we're talking to the, I would say like most out of the loop people, which is generally going to be either the highest level people or board people that they don't even know like what we've been doing. They hired us to do something and now we're having like a final presentation. Everything else, if we're talking to like, directors, engineering managers, things like that, we usually just build like documents to go through it and we'll have paragraphs, but then we'll have bold sections of the results so we can kind of go through it. Like I said, depends a little bit on, what is the expectation of this conversation, but you kind of want to play it by ear in terms of like, who are you actually talking to? And like, how much do they already know going into it? And how much do they need to know? Right. Like when we have a presentation next week with a board people and a couple other stakeholders who just signed the checks. They don't actually, they weren't actually involved. That's going to be a PowerPoint and everything else. But up to this point, all the things that we've done have just been documents because we've been working, hand in hand with their engineers and managers and things like that.
And also depending on the use case too, I find it helpful to have a document onto the side as you're presenting. So if there's any questions that are brought up to you or future asks for you to build out, you have your document with everything recorded. I know there's AI note takers out there now as well. Personally, I just like having a document to the side and writing up some quick notes. It makes me remember them a little bit better.
Yeah.
And also some people will send like the final document of a meeting recap to others just to summarize it. Which is a good bonus too, because sometimes people will forget what's on the call, especially if you're having 5 or 6 calls a day, which is quite common, especially as you climb the corporate ladder.
Yeah.
So let's pivot a little bit and talk about kind of project timelines and how you update different stakeholders. At least in my company right now, what I tend to do is try to give people an estimated timeline. Like, okay, I expect this project to be done in 1 or 2 weeks. When I first start working on a project, I'll let someone know, hey, I'm starting on your project today. I'm going to give you updates throughout the day. So that way they have expectations on Slack. Like, hey, if I'm getting spammed on messages, that means Ryan is working on my project. He has a few questions for me. And then when I think I have my final either numbers or presentation, I'll walk through that and expect that there's going to be some sort of revision. When you're working on projects, there's always new things that are discovered in your final call, or you might have found an error. Always expect your project to go a little bit longer than that initial timeline. But again, there's a lot of different types of stakeholders, whether internally or external. Matt, you deal with a lot of customers and across quite a few different companies. So how does that deal with you?
Yeah, I mean, we are very, one of the things, if you do any sort of reading and research on client relations, one of the things that you learn is every time you engage with stakeholders, you are selling yourself and selling what you're doing. Even though it's just a meeting to review where you at, you are selling yourself and what you are doing. It's just the way it is. Those meetings are the time that clients make decisions for 6 months down the road in their head of what we're going to be doing, if we're going to be continuing this, if we're going to move forward, whatever. We usually build, throughout the project, we build sort of update documents that say, they pretty much all say, this is what we did, these are the results we got, and then here's game plan and next steps, right? What are we working on next? What do we need from you? What do we want to do? What do the timelines look like? Those three things really kind of cover all your grounds, which is, I showed you what I did, sort of the proof of like, this is what we worked on. Here are the results. So you can see we did it, well, or whatever. And all of your language and phrasing should really be focused on success. I don't care if it went well or didn't. You want to find ways to talk about how it was successful, and then game plan to show them that we already know what we need to do next. We already know what we need from you, just sort of making sure that the ball is still rolling. Nobody wants to leave one of those meetings if they're paying you a lot of money. Nobody wants to leave one of those meetings thinking they aren't, we don't know what they did. We don't know where they're at with it. And we don't know what they're doing next. Like, nobody wants to leave those conversations with any of those thoughts. And so those three things we pretty much always have. We'll usually include information about what, and we don't, this isn't harsh. It's a way of sort of re-engaging them as you go. Even though they're already engaging with you as a company, you're always focused on that. Is, here's what you gave us or what you did that we need better on, right? Kind of not covering your ground isn't the way to, that's not how I would say it, but showing that, with that game plan section, there's more to do. And it's based on something that we need better from you. The best example I could give is, let's say they gave us a data set and we did a bunch of work and it looks really good. We would maybe have a section in there that says, but this part of your data set was really bad. And we still were able to achieve these results, but this part's really bad. And then the game plan would be to improve that and work with that, just so that they're understanding that you did as much as possible and you got as best results, and that there's still stuff that they need from you to keep moving. And then that game plan section kind of outlines, what do we need and what's our roadmap and things like that.
And this even goes back into kind of what we do with our mentorships here on the channel. So we have someone right now that's about to renew for his second batch of 5 lessons. So what we do on every single lesson is we have homework assignments to reinforce what was taught on that lesson, if it's anything through the technical side of things. Additionally, when we jump into the next lesson, we try to recap the concepts that were covered in the lesson prior. And we're always sending over a roadmap. So like this person right now, we're sending them over the lesson plan for the next 10 lessons, which we only typically do 5 at a time. But just to show, like, okay, after you finish these next 5 lessons, here's 5 more that we think will really, really help you within your space. But let's get through these first 5, then we'll jump into that one. And it's constant communication, right? Like, we make sure our schedules are aligned. We make sure to send over videos to watch before even the lessons start. This communication is so key on the customer side of things, whether it's like an internal customer at your business or, as you mentioned, external with other side of things. One thing we didn't talk about was storytelling, and we've already did bring it up in other videos, is going to be your resume or social media profiles, right? Let's say, for example, a LinkedIn. When someone sees your resume for the first time, if you're applying to a job, you're pitching yourself, you're pitching the story of how well have you accomplished tasks, whether you're applying for your first data analytics job or you're trying to jump from a DA to a data scientist or to a data engineer. What's the story on the piece of paper that shows that you have provided results at every single level? Like, you are the best data analyst to get that data engineering job. And, that's something that will take time to craft your resume, but it's so, so crucial. And I just didn't want to leave it out on that side of things. Another is going to be your LinkedIn profile. Now, I'm not going to be the one that says I have a perfect LinkedIn profile. In fact, if I go to mine right now, I think it's a bit amateurish. But if I was going out there applying to jobs, I would want to really craft an awesome LinkedIn and also start making a lot more technical posts on there. I get a little bit of engagement. So people know, like, A, yeah, it looks good on LinkedIn. It looks good on my resume. B, there's posts going, there's engagement. It's so important to present yourself well online. Another part of storytelling I want to bring up is kind of like promotions and how you can level up within your company. So how would you present yourself as an engineer to a manager if you want to eventually move up from like an engineer 1 to an engineer 2 or 3 and different things like that?
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who, of course, has a bunch of engineers on staff and hires and things like that, communication is still going to be very key. I'd rather have an engineer who is overly communicative, but runs into issues and things like that, than somebody who, just says, okay, hey, I got the work. I'll chat with you when it's done. Because it's very driven on trust. All this is very driven on trust. And although you might, get it done and be good with it, you're always, the person that hired you or your manager or whatever is always going to be very interested in like what if something comes up? Like if the timeline is 5 days and we're on the 4th day and I haven't heard from you, that's a risky situation. You might have a problem that should have been solved the first day or something. And so, my guys that are really good, they're very communicative. And when I get work from them and get the result and get those results, there's always clear feedback on where it's at, right? When we fine tune a model and they want to tell me, hey, it's done, here's the results I got. Here's a breakdown of what I see. That's something that we give externally, but when you're an engineer, your stakeholders are your manager or whoever pays your bill or whatever. Like those are the people that communication and that sort of results focused, nature, that's who wants to see it. I don't, we don't want guys that go off and then, 4 days, if I've had you on staff for years, then like, I'll give you some slack, but you're probably been here for years because you do those things. Like you do provide me results. You do ask questions. There's absolutely nothing wrong with asking internal people questions or asking for help. Everyone on the planet would rather you did that than not do it and then down the road have issues, because then we just gotta solve them, days and weeks later. So
I want to say this goes back into Scrum, which I know Scrum's kind of polarizing right now, but I read it a few years ago where fix the issue on the spot. If you see something or you don't understand, ask right then. Don't waste days.
Yeah, if I give someone a data set and I need a model and we figure out what the timeline is, I'd rather you ask questions right there about what accuracy do we want to get to? Let's say they take a look at the data set and they see something wrong. Like they just point out like, hey, just so you know, I see this problem. Let me as the manager, let me figure out what we should do instead of just you not communicating and make a decision and then come down the road 4 days later when I expect it to be done because I haven't heard anything. And there be some problem that now we really got to take a step back and figure out. So that those principles of communication and results focused, it really matters with stakeholders that are external and clients. But when your goal is to do good work and be successful and get promoted, then you need to shift that focus towards internal people that are in charge of you.
All right, so I think we pretty much covered all the questions from Ian, right? He said storytelling, which we talked about storytelling, whether with projects, with resumes, social media, as well as like asking for promotions, different things like that. Stakeholder engagement, communication is key. Always update people. And, how we develop these skills, or they come naturally. Personally, they pretty much came naturally. It's kind of common sense. If you have a question, ask it then. Don't try to hide those type of questions. Always try to keep moving forward with projects on that side of things. So what I'll say is if you guys have other topics you want us to see us cover here in the future, leave some comments either on our Discord server or on this video as well. If you have any questions about non-technical skills, as we mentioned throughout this video, leave those as well. We tend to respond to as many comments as possible, and make sure to join our Discord server if you need help with your data career, whether technical side of things or trying to get a job or promotion. Make sure to join our mentorship down below, and we'll catch you in next week's video.